You're live with Lucy Hockings on BBC World News. Millions of people could be starving within weeks. A renewed warning on Afghanistan from the World Food Programme if the international community doesn't step in to help.
We're now looking at the worst humanitarian crisis on Earth. 95% of the people don't have enough food, and now we're looking at 23 million people marching towards starvation.
It's takeoff time. The first flights for fully vaccinated foreigners resumed to the US 20 months after a COVID ban came into force. Former US President Barack Obama speaks at the COP26 climate conference, looking at how the world can adapt to rising temperatures. A host of European countries reintroduced COVID restrictions as cases soar across the continent. In the next half hour, we'll be live in Bamiyan, Afghanistan, Glasgow, Madrid and Budapest. It's been less than 3 months since the Taliban swept into power in Afghanistan, and now the UN's World Food Programme is spelling out in the clearest terms yet the extent of the famine facing the country. Many of the problems predate the Taliban. Drought has affected harvests and the conflict has taken its toll. But the reduction in foreign aid to the new Taliban government is also playing a part. Here's how the WFP's head, David Beasley, described the situation.
It is as bad as you possibly can imagine. In fact, we're now looking at the worst humanitarian crisis on Earth. 95% of the people don't have enough food, and now we're looking at 23 million people marching towards starvation. Out of that, almost 9 million are knocking on famine's door. The winter months are coming. We're coming out of a drought. The next 6 months are going to be catastrophic. It is going to be hell on earth. To the world leaders, to the billionaires, imagine if this was your little girl or your little boy or your grandchild about to starve to death. You would do everything you possibly could. And when there's $400 trillion worth of wealth on the earth today, shame on us that we let any child die from hunger. Shame on us. I don't care where that child is.
David Beasley there. He was speaking to our World Affairs editor, John Simpson, who is in Bamiyan in Afghanistan right now and joins us live from there. He was so passionate, John, speaking to you there about what is happening in Afghanistan and the threat of famine and starvation for so many people. Can you give us an idea of what life is like there right now?
The odd thing, Lucy, is that it's like one of those dreadful, slow car crashes. You can see it happening. You live through it. You're waiting for it to happen, but it isn't actually there at the moment. I mean, in this place, Bamiyan, where I am, there are stalls full of fruit, for instance. There's plenty of food in the shops at the moment, but everybody knows that directly the weather turns, and there's already snow on the mountains as you come into Bamiyan, that things are going to change. It is getting colder. People are getting really scared that food will run out.
And John, what is the relationship like between the Taliban and aid agencies?
Well, it's never been good. I mean, the Taliban detest aid agencies like they detest the international organizations of any kind. They think of them as being there to trap and undermine and to westernize and so forth. But the interesting thing is that the Taliban themselves are starting to get very nervous. They can see what's coming, and they know that it could mean the destruction of their own rule in this country. I mean, who knows what might happen if food program people themselves tell me that they've actually had no problems whatsoever with the Taliban. The Taliban have been actually quite helpful to them and willing to let them in and let them do what they want, because they realize that their own future could well depend on this.
A positive sign too, was it, John, that the polio campaign, which the Taliban had been against, actually started again today as well? The Taliban agreed to let that get underway?
Yes, you see, I don't think any of these things are a coincidence. I think that they realise that even if they don't like the idea of polio injections and so forth, they realise that the lives of people are at risk, and if they continue to do this and behave as they have done in the past, then what happened to them in 2001 when they got chased out could happen to them again. It's it's self-interest. It's not some kind of helpful sort of approach, but nevertheless, that seems to be the approach they're taking.
John, great to have you with us. Our World Affairs editor John Simpson there. He'll be reporting throughout the day from Bamiyan. The United States has reopened its land and air borders to travellers from much of the world, 20 months after a ban was first imposed. The easing of restrictions covers the UK, Brazil, China, India, Ireland, South Africa and the 26 European countries in the Schengen zone. Potentially, that's tens of millions of travellers. There are some rules still in place. To be eligible, people will need to be fully vaccinated with an authorised jab. That list contains 8 vaccines: Pfizer, Moderna, AstraZeneca, Covaxin, Covishield, Sinopharm and Sinovac. They all require the 2 jabs, and then of course there is Johnson & Johnson with their single jab. Travellers will have to provide proof of vaccination, and they will also have to provide either a negative COVID test result or show that they've recently recovered from the virus. Now, children, they don't need to be vaccinated, but any age between 2 and 17 will have to take a COVID test, between 3 and 5 days after arriving in the US. Well, let's bring you the thoughts now. Some of the people who were able to fly to the US again today.
Oh, we're going to New York and Nashville. And what are your plans? Where are you on holiday? You're on holiday.
Gonna see Elvis Presley's house, ride some horses and do some shopping.
And have you guys been out to the States before? When was the last time you went out? Oh, a while ago. Nobody's been anywhere for ages, have they? Last time we went, where did we go last? I went LA last time, but now we want to explore a couple of new states. Great. And when you saw that America was going to be opening back up again, was this one of the first places that you wanted to go to? Were you sort of desperate to get out to the States in particular?
Just wanted to go on holiday. Yeah, just anywhere I could go. Happy to go.
We had this booked and we've had to move it a couple of times, so we were so happy. When we heard it was opening on the 8th, we said, right, put it on the 8th. We rang Virgin straight up and said, put us on the 8th, first flight there.
So they're off already. Their flight currently heading to the US because we saw pictures of it taking off. And as you might expect, airlines, which have lost fortunes during the pandemic, are thrilled about the news. They even staged what is considered very rare. What you can see right there, that is a double takeoff from Heathrow, featuring planes from both British Airways and Virgin Atlantic. You saw Caroline Davies there. Well, she has also been speaking to the chief executive officers from both companies.
Shai, to start with you first, you are the CEO of Virgin Atlantic, but you haven't been able to fly UK travellers across the Atlantic in the vast majority of cases for 20 months. What sort of impact has that had on your business?
Well, our story has been very well documented, but today really is a day of celebration. Finally, after more than 600 days, this important corridor between the UK and the United States is opening. And just to hear these stories of uniting loved ones, but also allowing business to connect and start getting back to normal activity is really a day of celebration. I'm glad to do it here with British Airways and for joint takeoff today.
And Sean, some people are worried as well that now that travel is back open again to America, that flight prices might go up. What reassurance can you give? Is that something that people are going to see?
Look, I can say there's fantastic value out there at the minute, and we're adding as many seats as we possibly can. So today we're flying to 17 cities in the United States, and by December it will be 23. And I think by summer you will see, all the frequencies back that were there in summer 19. So there is great value out there. Airlines are promoting very good fares. But I would say book early and make your plans, because there's a lot of demand for people to reunite like we have seen with family and loved ones. And that's certainly what we've seen since the announcement came about 2 or 3 weeks ago.
Now, a really crucial question, of course, is that this is happening during the week of COP26, focus on transport this week. This is a major long-haul destination. What are both of your airlines doing about emissions and pollution? Can I start with Shai?
Yeah, of course, COP26 is a major event, and aviation is a big part of life, both for businesses and families. So we believe that we need to innovate further, but we've both set targets for net zero by 2050, but action must start today and now. We're both flying A350s, which are the most efficient planes out there for long-haul travel. We're going to do everything we can to find sustainable aviation fuels, but it's really also about having the youngest fleet in the sky, which we're promoting as a necessary step towards that net zero goal of 2050.
And Sean?
Yeah, I would echo what Shai is saying, and I think the A350 is very exciting because the aircraft it replaces today was the 747, and the fuel burn is about 40% less. And secondly, we're trialling sustainable aviation fuel today because 37% of the fuel on our flight will be SAF, and that gives you an insight into what the future holds. So we will be embarking on offsetting, we'll be committing to the development of sustainable aviation fuel, but we're also seeing some exciting innovations come along in the form of hydrogen technology that we also expect to be part of the solution. So aviation has a good story to tell. It's got a pathway to net zero by 2050, and we're starting now.
Let's take you to the French Riviera and the city of Cannes, where a man armed with a knife has attacked police officers. He was then shot. Reports suggest an officer was struck on a stab vest but suffered no wound while sitting in a patrol car. The officers then opened fire. The suspect is in a serious condition in hospital. Detectives are investigating whether there was a religious or terrorist motivation. The rappers Travis Scott and Drake are being sued over Friday's stampede at the Astroworld Music Festival in Houston, in which 8 people were killed. Prosecutors in Texas have filed lawsuits on behalf of relatives of the victims and injured concertgoers. The stampede happened while Scott was performing. Criminal investigations are also underway. MPs in the UK will hold an emergency debate on Monday into parliamentary standards. Prime Minister Boris Johnson has been criticised for what his opponents say are double standards after his government tried to change the rules on MPs' behaviour after one of its members was found guilty of breaking lobbying rules. As the COP26 climate summit enters its second and final week, delegates in Glasgow are discussing adaptation, loss and damage, how to mitigate the effects global warming has already had. Now, the WHO says the climate crisis is one of the most urgent health emergencies that we all face. So let's take you live to Glasgow and speak to Dr. Maria Nera, who is Director of the WHO's Department of Public Health and Environment. Good to see you. What would you say is the most urgent health issue that is linked to climate change?
I think it's the combustion of fossil fuels, which is contributing not only to the global warming, but to the air pollution. And the air pollution, the exposure to air pollution is representing more than 7 million premature deaths every year. So for us, the reduction of the emissions on a very, very strong and important way will be a fantastic way to protect our health and to obtain enormous benefits for our health. So we are here to say that not only climate change is affecting our health, but if you take very decisive action to reduce the causes of climate change, the health benefits will be enormous. So I think we all have a lot to gain if the right decisions are taken here.
In terms of what is being called a crisis around air pollution, which countries are suffering the most?
Well, this is the horrible part of this, because everybody is suffering from the consequences of climate change on our health. But those vulnerable countries, those developing countries, which are the ones not contributing to the emissions and less responsible for what is happening, are the ones suffering the most. So we have floodings, we see people migrating, we see people losing the very poor health systems that they have already, and they are affected as well by heat waves or by the fact that there are diseases that are vector-borne or waterborne transmitted that are affecting their health, or the losing the capacity to have a proper agricultural production and therefore having a very nasty impact on the nutritional status of the people.
What feeling are you getting speaking to other delegates there in Glasgow? Is there a sense of urgency there that this is going to be addressed, that real change is on the horizon?
I think I've been attending several COPs, and I have the impression that this one, that the pressure by the citizens, that the awareness is much bigger, and the pressure is probably higher for all of us in terms of feeling a little bit more the emergency. This is translating into big commitments and statements. Now we need to make sure that those are ambitious enough and quick enough, and particularly whether there is an accountability For us, health speaks so strongly that maybe for the next COP, one way to demonstrate whether those commitments and statements that are made now here will be translated into saving lives, cleaning the air we breathe, having healthier diets and more sustainable ways of transport and mobility and better urban environments for all of us. I think that will be, and stopping destroying our ecosystems, which are so important for protecting our health. Maybe this is the way to measure all of these commitments here and to keep the pressure and elevate the sense of emergency, because if people understand that this is affecting their health, our health, and it's today, not for next generation, is affecting our health right now, I think that will be a way to create more motivation, and health can be the driving force to maybe accelerate the commitments and the political desire to do something big.
And some accountability too. Dr. Maria Nara, good to see you. Thanks for joining us from Glasgow. You're live with Lucy Hockings. Stay with us, still to come. Well, with Europe back at the epicentre of the pandemic, restrictions are being imposed across the continent. So we'll be taking you live to Madrid and to Budapest. Well, as the US reopens to foreign travellers, some countries in Europe, like Greece and the Netherlands, have just reintroduced new measures to limit the spread of coronavirus. The WHO is warning Europe once again is at the epicentre of the pandemic. That could see 500,000 more deaths by February. Well, since the infection rates have started going up, there's real alarm in many places in Europe, particularly in Eastern Europe, where infection rates are going up and deaths are rising too. So let's contrast the pictures across Europe. We can take you live now to Madrid and join our correspondent Guy Hedgecoe. And joining us from Budapest is Nick Thorpe. Nick, I wanted to start with you because you've recently returned from Romania, one of the hardest hit countries at the moment. What's happening there?
There you have hospitals, intensive care units completely full and overflowing, so hardly enough places in intensive care units. So in Romania and Bulgaria, probably the worst countries in terms of death rates in the world at this moment. 22 people per million are dying daily in those two countries. So pretty serious situation in Romania and Bulgaria. And in response to that, a sudden increase, a surge in vaccinations as people realise how serious the situation is in those countries.
Up until this point, why have people not wanted to have the vaccine?
I think the real East-West divide, from me working many years in Eastern Europe, is one of trust in politicians and trust in institutions. I think it's partly a legacy from the communist era. People don't trust their politicians, they don't trust their institutions, and whereas I think in Western Europe, on the whole, they do, and therefore when people say something is dangerous, they must get vaccinated. On the whole, in Western Europe, there's more of a tendency to believe that message.
Nick has got a bit of a gremlin in the system there. He is not in Glasgow. He is actually in Budapest. We're going to take you right across Europe now to Madrid, to Guy Hedgecoe, who is there. A very different picture in Spain and in Portugal as well, Guy, in the Iberian Peninsula. What's gone right so far and what's happening right now with infection rates?
Well, in Spain, the situation has improved a lot since the summer. Infections came down a lot throughout August, September, and well into October. And around the middle of last month, we saw the lowest incidence rate per 100,000 inhabitants that Spain had seen for well over a year. It was at around 40 infections per 100,000 people. So overall, there's a feeling that things are very stable here, and that they have been improving. And last week, the health minister here in Spain, Carolina Darias, said that Spain is better than most other European countries. It is in a better position than them, and she said that the virus has been cornered, as she put it. That has been attributed to a number of reasons, among them the high vaccination rate. In Spain, it's around 80%, and also the fact that people are still wearing masks, even though they don't necessarily have to all the time. They do have to wear them inside in public spaces, but not anywhere else. And yet you do still see people wearing masks a lot, even when they don't have to. I should point out that the numbers of infections have started to creep up in the last few days, but overall the feeling is that things are relatively stable here in Spain, even though in other countries they are not.
Yeah, Nick, what is the feeling in countries like Romania and Bulgaria about some of those restrictions, about wearing a mask, for instance, outside and in restaurants, about large gatherings of people? Are people adhering to those kind of rules and restrictions?
They are adhering to them, and I think this is actually one of the main things having an effect on pushing up the number of vaccinations. As I was interviewing people in Romania, in Western Romania recently, asking people as they queued for their first vaccination, and of course vaccinations have been available now 10, 11 months in that country, but many people were saying it wasn't so much fear of the virus or fear of the vaccine, it was more the restrictions were driving them to get vaccinated now. For example, in Romania now, you cannot sit inside or outside a restaurant or a bar. You cannot go into a shopping mall unless you can show a proof of double vaccination. So I think that sort of love of freedom of the population is sort of forcing people or is convincing them to get vaccinated. I think that's the single biggest reason people were giving to me.
Guy, would you say that in Spain and in Portugal too, there's a high trust in the government and the messaging coming out of the government as well?
Yeah, I think we've been seeing less of that sort of the anti-vax movement in these countries, in Spain and in Portugal. And I think a lot of it has to do partly with trust in the government, although I wouldn't say that's necessarily overwhelming. But I think the fact is, certainly in Spain in particular, that there's a lot of devolution in terms of local government, and it's been local governments who have been given the responsibility to vaccinate people. There are 17 different regional governments here in Spain. In Portugal, things are slightly less devolved. It's a smaller country, obviously. But I think certainly here in Spain, that has had a lot to do with it. The fact it's been devolved and each regional administration has been given the responsibility to do that. Perhaps people have more faith in their regional healthcare services than the national government, and that has encouraged people. There's also been a big campaign in terms of information, informing people of the importance of getting vaccinated. And after quite a slow start to the vaccination campaign here in Spain at the beginning, partly because of complications related to local governments and bureaucracy, things really did get up and running. And I think the government, the national government and the regional governments have made a huge effort to try and reach the goals that they've set.
Guy, good to see you in Madrid. Nick, thanks for joining us as well from Budapest in Hungary, just to give you a sense of the picture in different parts of Europe when it comes to the pandemic, amid warnings from the WHO about how things are possibly going to get over the winter. Well, a very different story as well to bring you now from the Central Asian Republic of Turkmenistan. Now, like North Korea, it claims it has no coronavirus cases. Information is tightly controlled. The WHO has to rely on data provided by the government. But now COVID cases are being reported by independent observers and media. Abdul Razulov sent us this report.
This is a nation of health and happiness. At least this is how a state TV portrays Turkmenistan. Its government says that the country is COVID-free. And yet there's a growing number of reports claiming that the nation is struggling to cope with rising COVID cases.
We found proven cases when people had COVID. We have medical paperwork.
Turkmen.news, a foreign-based website, has identified more than 70 people who died from COVID.
The situation is quite bad.
Its editor, Ruslan Metiyev, says that this figure is just a tiny fraction of all existing cases. I asked a representative of the World Health Organization how they assess the situation. Until recently, the WHO referred to the government data, repeating that Turkmenistan registered 0 COVID cases. But it appears that their position has changed.
And our current assessment is that, from a scientific point of view, it's unlikely that SARS-CoV-2 is not circulating in the country.
But do you think then that the government is giving you wrong data or false data?
In our current legal frameworks and international governance, we as an institution do not question and cannot call into question whether a country is acting in the spirit of the international health regulations.
Now, WHO has managed to convince the Turkmen authorities to introduce measures to protect the population. But, like this TV ad about face masks, none of them acknowledge that the coronavirus is spreading across the country. Under its current mandate, WHO cannot say that the Turkmen authorities are lying about COVID cases. But many observers question whether they can stop the spread of the virus without demanding the truth. Abduljalil Abdurasulov, BBC News.
A rare look at what is happening inside Turkmenistan right now. We have some lovely pictures to bring you from Pakistan. Wildlife teams were involved in a race against time, literally, to save a rare and blind Indus River dolphin that needed rescuing after straying from home. As you can see, they used some nets and they trapped him, and while obviously trying not, of course, to scare him or do any damage, they made sure his skin didn't dry out, and then it was an 80-kilometre journey to the Sindh Wildlife Sanctuary. So a happy ending, and well done to the team involved.